Great. So, hello, dear Professor, Professor Francois. My name is Safar, and by me today is Abror. So, this is our next series of our Silk Road Revival podcast. So, we bring that highly academic knowledge to the masses in economics and finance. So, I will briefly introduce today's guest. So Patrick Francois is professor of economics at UBC Vancouver School of Economics. So he studies how institutions, politics, and social norms shape development, covering social capital and trust, power sharing inside autocracies, the persistence of clientelism, and when accountability really sticks. So his work blends clean theory with novel data from around the world, and he has held leading editorial roles in top journals. So, about today's agenda, so we'll have three parts. In the first part, we'll ask you some personal and work-related questions to get to know you and your works better. In the second part, we'll briefly discuss one of your research papers, which is public service motivation as an argument for government provision. And in the third part, we will go over another one of your other one of your works, which is pro-social motivation and the delivery of social services. So I hope you're ready to go because we are, and let's get started. So straight to the point, Patrick Francois, what first drew you to the field of economics? Was there some open eyes moment that made you realize that this is exactly what you want to be doing for the rest of your life?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess no single event like that, but I was not a very good student as an undergraduate student, so I was very involved in other things. Mainly, I was playing, I'm from Australia, so I was playing a sport that's Australian football, which is a specific sport that is a big where I was growing up. So I was a bad student because I was training a lot. And I had a car accident that meant I couldn't play, at least for a while, and never to the level that I played again. So I had to quit my professional career, really. And then I started noticing the things that I was studying at university. One of them was economics, and really that car accident made me turn my attentions more to the intellectual world. And economics I always found really appealing because it had this very non-ideological, it felt very non-sort of partisan, non-political way of viewing the social world based on theories that made sense of individual actions and how they aggregated up to the social whole. So rather than the theories that started from the aggregate, which I didn't find very appealing, like theories of class or social drivers that were sort of at the collective level, I found that the collective was really made more sense to me to think of it as the outcome of a bunch of individuals. So the methodological individualism in economics was really appealing to me. And introspectively, it seemed like a better explanation of why I did things. I didn't do things out of class identity. I did things out of, self kind of motivated drivers. So economics just appealed to me as a way of thinking about human interaction.
Got it. Thanks a lot for the response.
Thank you. Um, so your research spans the areas of development economics, political economy, norms, also in institutions, and etc. So how do you see all those branches of economics intersect?
Well, I think for me, I was always more of a development economist first, so I was not per se interested in political economy and institutions. It's just that when I started to think about the questions, the big questions, like why are some places so prosperous and others not, it seemed really hard to be ignoring the institutions and the political dimension, the way that power is allocated and the way that leaders were constrained in how they use power, and whether they were social constraints or formal institutional constraints or they were cultural constraints. They seem to me the big questions. So that's why my interest turned more towards the political economy aspects of development, which is where I live now. I think that's it. So it was driven by development primarily, and then political economy came as an afterthought, but it was because it seemed to me that that was dealing with the big topics. There was also another thing that happened in the profession too, that a lot of the big ideas in development really got replaced, that kind of big idea approach, with an approach that was focused much more on answering small practical problems, providing small practical solutions in particular contexts in a well-identified way empirically. And that just never seemed that interesting a set of topics for me to work on, although I think those topics are really important in context. I just was never attracted to that sort of work. So I'm always more interested in the mechanisms and, why we have such differences, rather than alleviating some sort of problem in a particular context at a particular time. Although, like I said, that's an important thing to do, just not something that ever drew me intellectually.
I got it. Thank you.
So I got a follow up here. So do you think that for a person in highly academic field, it is better to have knowledge of, let's say, like a wide range of disciplines, or is it better to niche down early on, like to a particular field?
Yeah. I think it's hard to have a knowledge of a wide range of disciplines. So it's probably better to dig in and learn something really well. And then I think once you've done that, you have to kind of accept that you just know things from a particular perspective. You don't know it from every perspective, and that other perspectives can be really useful and informative and helpful. So then you have to try to engage with them. But it's much easier to engage with them when you have a specific question, rather than, I'm going to learn sociology or I'm going to learn neuroscience. And that's impossible. Like, it's really very few people, and it's certainly not possible for me. So, but what I can do is, when I work on a topic, I know economics really well, I know our methodology really well. Then I'm like, oh, these guys in this other field have talked about it. Now I'm going to go into that field just to learn the bits that are relevant for what I want to know. That's feasible. So I think the goal is a good goal. Like, knowing as much you can from a broader set of perspectives is really good. I guess the problem is that it's not feasible to do that by educating yourself fully in multiple disciplines. It's better to understand one really deeply and then to branch away from that once you have focused on a topic you're interested in that is touched by multiple disciplines.
Got it. Thanks.
Thank you. So my question is, what is the result or finding across all your research papers that you think policymakers could implement these days with a high chance of like real impact, that you think were not implemented yet, or were implemented but kind of not the way you thought it would be like?
Oh, yeah, that's a hard question. I'm not sure. I can just think of a few things that, I don't usually think of my work as directly informing policy. I think of my work as trying to understand what's going on. And so I never focus on, I want to advise a policymaker. That's never how I've started any project, I don't think. So it's more like, gee, there's this curious thing going on. What's going on there? So for instance, one of the areas that I looked at was the allocation of resources in Indian villages. And I wrote a paper some 10 years ago. It was published on that. And that paper really opened my eyes a fair bit. So it really showed a type of clientelism and capture of the resources that were being provided into villages by a sort of a landed elite. And I felt that at the end of that, it was really, if you had a central government that was concerned about allocating resources to the poor, it would be better to bypass a lot of those local institutions. Those local institutions were not able to deliver those resource flows to the poor in a good way. And so I would think that in my view, that there's always this trade-off between sort of capture of a local institution by the elite and the benefit of having local knowledge that helps you target resources better. I felt that at least in the villages that I saw in the state of Maharashtra, capture was a much bigger problem. So I am sort of supportive of efforts to bypass those institutions and to directly allow resources to flow to individuals. So things like, for example, having banking, having direct accounts that individuals would be able to access rather than depending on a flow of resources from their local government. I think that's actually a really good idea. And India's taken a lot of those steps in some states, and I think that's a thing that should be done more. At least, 10 years ago on the data that I saw, that was the right call, and that would be something that I'd be very interested in seeing more of. It could be the data's changed, also the government's changed, so a lot of things have probably affected that, but in principle, it seemed to me like a good idea to do that.
Yeah, thank you.
So my next question would be about young researchers. So you work across theory and empirics, and most of the researchers do. So for young people who are interested in making writing some academic paper, how do you decide when a question needs a model versus data, and what's your rule of thumb on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a really good question. So I work with empirical people, but I work pretty much exclusively on empirical problems that I build models for. So that's exactly the question that we need to ask is when do you need a model? And to me, I have kind of a high bar for that. So I think there's a lot of papers that have models that do nothing, and I think you shouldn't do that. So just putting something in mathematics that you could do in another language like English, just do it in English. If you can understand it all, it's fine. So sometimes you can just write down directly an estimating equation that will be what you want to run on the data to get your answers to the questions. Then don't write a model. Doesn't impress anyone. It's just a waste of time. Where I think you need a model is when you're confused. So that happens a lot to me, that I look at data and I think, oh gee, there's these interesting patterns. Well, what's going on here? So then I try to think of a story. And if I can tell the story again in English in my head, and because I don't think in mathematics, I think in English, like the words come in, the concepts, the story. Then again, if I can tell the story cleanly, I don't write down a model. But often when I'm telling the story, I think, maybe it's because these people have this incentive and these people have this incentive and there's some interaction in the market and it's got something to do with the government. I can't keep it all clear in my head. Then the tool of a model, and usually it's a mathematical model, becomes really useful. So when I can feel when it's useful because I'm getting my confusion cleared up, my confusion's dissipating, and I'm getting a clearer picture. So when I have that feeling, that's when I write down a model. And then the model can make things clear to me. So ideally, that's the first step. And sometimes it just stops there because now I understand, and it doesn't really do much extra. But sometimes that model will say to me, oh, okay, if this is the right explanation, then you should be seeing a whole bunch of other things. So it's going to suggest to me other ways of cutting the data. So other regressions to run, or maybe some interaction terms or something. The model's going to be telling me that if this is the important mechanism, you should be seeing some other stuff in the data. So it makes me go back to the data and check more. And that interaction between the data and the model, that's a really fruitful exercise to me. That's the point of theorizing here. The theorizing makes me go in a deeper way and sometimes in a different way towards the data. And then if it's confirmed, then I go back and think about, okay, then this theory is going to actually be a big part of the paper, because the paper is really being driven by the theory. The data analysis is being driven by the theory. Then I want to have the theory there. But if it's the case that I have data, I run some regressions, and then I'm like, I can come up with a story that makes sense of them, fine. sometimes if that story is complicated, I might even put down a model, but it's not really central to the paper. It's more when the theory gives me more in the empirics. That's when I think it's really worth doing. So to answer your question, 1, I first have to be confused. 2, the model helps me with confusion. 3, the model tells me some stuff to do with the data. 4, it's confirmed in the data. It says, hey, looks like there's something going on with this theory. Then I feel like I have a paper.
Yes, great explanation. Thank you.
Thanks. And I should say too that I don't think many people work like this anymore. So I think, I try to teach my graduate students to work this way, but I don't think it's common. So I think there's a lot of atheoretical work, which is just, we identified something really good. We have some really good variation in some data, which allows us to identify something. Or there's kind of a lot of theory that's devoid from empirical content. Like people just come up with theories and then they look around for something that they can apply it to. And the papers feel they don't feel very good, those papers, because it feels like, it's always an awkward mismatch, right? Like the theory isn't really about what's in the data. So I kind of think it's good to start the theory after you've seen the data. Really think about your theory as helping you explore the data.
Yeah, very insightful. Thank you. So my next question would be about so many of your papers discuss trust, norms, culture, and how they all interact with formal institutions, right? And how do you think about designing policy interventions that can shift norms, which are often deeply embedded, in a way that avoids backlash, um, is scalable, and persists after external support is kind of removed?
Yeah, it's really hard. I don't know how to do that. So I'm not sure that even you want to do it. I think there's an interaction between norms and institutions, and I think institutions don't exist in a vacuum, right? And it's actually sometimes hard to draw the line between where an institution is and where its norms. It's like it's not even that well defined. So it's hard. There's a fair bit of literature on this, right? People trying to move norms, and they can do it in a few ways. So one is by providing information, and often that information is not about objective reality, it's about what other people think. So people can be locked into a set of beliefs that they are, misled about. So in the sense, everyone thinks that everyone else is against whatever it is, women working or gay marriage or whatever it is. And by providing information about what other people actually think, you can change their sort of higher order beliefs. And when higher order beliefs change, then they feel like, well, maybe it's okay for me to express my true belief, which is that, it's okay for women to work or something like that. And then that will change the norm. Because when everyone's now openly expressing a sort of a desire for some set of activities, then now these activities can become normalized. So I think those interventions that provide clarity about the beliefs of others can actually be really useful. And there's been examples of that in the economics literature. I think there's a bigger general question, which is like, why would we ever feel like we should be changing norms? We have some sort of ethical considerations here, so we have a set of particular values and norms that come from our cultures, and like I always feel like, who am I to tell other people what they should do, what they should value? I have strong ideas in my own case, and I think some sets of norms are probably better at advancing the sort of social welfare that I care about, but I feel very reluctant to impose those. So I feel like as a researcher, more my role is to understand how these things sit together as an equilibrium, how these norms support these institutions and they support these practices. I want to understand that first. And my it's very much a secondary thing to me to think, oh, how would I go in and change a society? I don't feel like we rarely have enough information to be confident in doing that. And even if we felt like, wow, I confidently understand how I could do it, I don't feel like it's generally what I want to do. Yeah.
Got it. So, Professor Francois, my last question for the part one would be, what in the future, looking forward, what big questions in economics excite you the most and keep you curious? Some so-called arguments in your head, like some confusions.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of big issues that the world's facing, and so that economists, are working on those and should work on those, and I'm excited to understand them. So one is, I think there's been this gradual slide into autocracy from a number of otherwise pretty stable democracies. So why that's happening, I think that has massive social consequences. I'm wondering how that interacts with the technology, so information technology. Is it facilitating it, and how is it likely to evolve? I think there's a sort of a revolution going on in intelligence. There's a form of alien intelligence that's being built that's operating in parallel to us, and I think there's a lot of concerns around that. I think we should understand that much better. Social scientists should be studying that. They should. So I think that those are they're to me big social problems that I think economists should be at the forefront of tackling. And I think for me, intellectually, I'm very curious about how the mind interacts with the environment. So things like consciousness, how consciousness relates to culture, how culture affects economic activities. All of those questions are super interesting to me. What we mean by culture, how culture gets created. Yeah, so they're things that I'm curious about. But I think there's also a big set of problems that are super interesting.
Thank you for sharing.
So this was basically the end of part one, and we can freely move to the part two.
Right.
So we will briefly discuss one of your research papers, which is public service motivation as an argument for government provision. So I will briefly present the paper and its findings, and then we'll move on to the questions. So some jobs, say teachers, nurses, social workers, are powered by people who care about the mission itself, not about the money. But in these services, quality is hard to measure, and profit targets can push managers to cut corners, which kills that intrinsic drive. So, Professor Francois shows in this paper that when mission motivation matters and quality is hard to verify, public or non-profit provision can actually get more real effort and better outcomes than for-profit firms, because the mission is protected there. And it's not a blanket rule, as quality is easy to measure and competition works fine. And the main takeaway here, I would say, is that treat a worker motivation like an economic asset and design ownership and incentives to harness and make it prosper, not mute it. So I hope I didn't miss anything out. And we can move to the questions. So, Professor Francois, what first sparked your curiosity that the mission, not just money, might justify public or non-profit provision?
Yeah, so firstly, you got it right. That's the right way to think about the insight from that paper. What first sparked me was I was in a car with Andre Schleifer, and I was a graduate student, and I was driving him. He was visiting my university, and I picked him up at the airport because I couldn't meet him because he's famous, and he was famous then, but I wanted to talk to him about his stuff. I really loved he's a very, very elegant modeler. So I asked him, so, he said to me actually in the car, he said, oh, what do you think governments should do? And because he had written this paper on government provision. And I was like, well, yeah, like, I don't know, I just drew a blank. I was like, yeah, I mean, he just raised the question. And I remember thinking, I went home and thought about it and thought, one thing that they can do is they can harness a motivation that people have that they may be reluctant to lend that motivation for free. Why? I mean, I'm motivated by an outcome, but if I think my boss is going to take that extra effort I'm doing and make money from it, which is what a profit motivated firm would do, then maybe I won't do it. So it was that thinking made me think not just about, it was in the context of government. That's why that paper's more about government, the first one. But it was actually just showing that actually makes sense, that this could make sense in a competitive market, that firms that could commit to not extracting the surplus. So that would be a government manager who doesn't get to keep the extra revenue, or a non-profit firm. They could actually outcompete the private firms. So that residual claimancy, which we usually think of as a great motivator, the fact that I'm going to keep the profit, actually could work to undermine these intrinsic motivations. So that was the insight there, and it gave an argument for something which I think people see, that a lot of people in this, when I started to look at the literature, which is not in economics, which is on this public service motivation, that people talk a lot about that good public service providers actually stoke and encourage this intrinsic motivation and manage to extract it from workers. And that just seems like a social good. So that paper was about that mechanism. Yeah. I actually think it's a bigger and more important mechanism through time too, because I think the non-profit sector utilizes it as well, and it's something that's going to grow more importance. So I think, yeah, that paper was an early sort of contribution to that literature.
Yes, thanks. So my next question would be, your theory is about selection and effort. So what do you think matters more in this context? Hiring mission-driven people or keeping them motivated once inside?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I think they're both important. So I don't know, the simple question of which one matters more. I think they're both important. So the selection component is super important, but I wouldn't say that's the whole thing. And the reason we know it is because if you look at the career trajectories of a lot of people who work in those sort of caring and mission motivated sectors, there's a lot of burnout. A lot of people feel that one, that their mission motivation wanes through time, partly because maybe they feel that the end, which is to make the world a better place, isn't really being achieved. It's hard. The problems just keep coming. So I think that's part of it. But I think another one is a lot of people in the sector complain about the fact that they feel like they're kind of being exploited. The fact that they care a lot means that they're underpaid and they're not getting, say, the overtime or the kind of extra rewards that somebody with a similar set of skills but in the private sector will get. So that actually undermines their intrinsic motivation too. And that's kind of related to the things I talked about in the paper, right? It's that if I feel I'm contributing extra effort, but it's not going to the goal, it's just because the organization's exploiting me, then that will undermine my desire to give that effort for free. And then that undermines the whole process. So I think part of the design of these organizations is to help people feel like their actual efforts matter for the outcomes they care about. And directly, so that they can experience that, and then that stops the kind of erosion of the mission motivation. I think that's an important thing. I haven't seen a lot of work on that, but I think the dynamics of that are really important. But absolutely, the selection thing is there too, because we all have different things that we care about. So you have to be, matching the mission motivation of the organization with the employees. But markets should be okay. They should do a good job of that, because people have incentive to advertise those things truthfully.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. Um, so my next question would be,
Sorry,
there are
I'm just gonna I'm gonna let my dog out. She's just gonna.
Sure.
Sorry.
Sure, perfect.
Sorry about that.
Completely okay. So, Professor Francois, nowadays there are firms and corporations that grow worldwide, and outsourcing became unavoidable. So, what are some moves that best protect intrinsic motivation of the company when outsourcing, and what mistakes do companies make that makes it kill it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know much about the. I mean, I know generally what outsourcing is, but in this context, I haven't thought about it too much. But one thing that is immediately clear here is that when you divorce the efforts of individuals from the outcome, then that erodes the mission motivation, right? So anything that does that. So if the outsourcing is creating a distance between the producer of the effort and the final result, then that's going to undermine mission motivation. People are mission motivated when they can see their extra efforts, the things that they're doing free in a sense, actually mattering. So the kind of an intimacy between the provider of the service and the receiver, that's really important. So to the extent that outsourcing increases that distance and obscures the relation, that's going to undermine mission motivation. So I guess if that was a problem, then what you would do is you'd need to make sure that people are aware that their actions matter, so that their actions are going to affect the thing they care about. So that could be through other sorts of information flows, right? So something like Zoom meetings, like if they're doing it in country X and their actions are happening in country X, but it's affecting country Y, then they could be brought to see what the impact of their actions are. So anything that would bridge that gap is going to be useful in stimulating the intrinsic motivation.
Mm-hmm, got it. So my last question, and it's not totally paper related, but what further research questions did working on this paper raise?
Yeah, so it sort of, there's a whole literature that came after it. I wouldn't say that it followed from my paper, but it was really about how the mission motivated sector coexists with the more profit motivated sector. So how does the market solve this problem, right? So the problem is like, what's the optimal form of organization to deliver? So what's the most efficient form? And there are efficiency gains to having non-profits, say, in some sectors. What happens when they are competing with for-profits? And the government is also a player. Like, what are the equilibrium outcomes here? Are there conditions under which you're going to be at suboptimal outcomes where you would need to, say, regulate it? So you would have to limit entry of one particular type. Is that is that not necessary? Will the market generally kind of equilibrate to something that's socially efficient? So those questions are the kind of questions that people ask when they start to model these firms interacting together. And then there's all the empirical questions, like how important is this? It could be that, we can think theoretically, oh yeah, it's kind of important that people are mission motivated. But, if you look at the data, actually that ends up being like 1% of the motivation. Everything else is just career concerns or, direct salaries or something. Then it's just a kind of academic interest. It's not really it's not really operationally important. So I think then, there's a whole bunch of empirical papers looking at, how much these motivations matter, and experiments too on it. So there's a big literature in the public sector. I forgot what this public sectoral studies. It's not economics, but stuff related to that, and then a lot of economists working on this related stuff too.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. So this is basically the end of part two. Really got a lot of insights. Appreciate it. So we can move to the part three, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Uh, so I got excited by another of your paper, which is also the idea is closely related to the paper that we discussed right now. So it's called Pro-Social Motivation and the Delivery of Social Services. So I could also briefly introduce the paper, and then we could proceed to my questions. So here, Professor Francois studies how pro-social motivation shapes real outcomes in services like schools and hospitals, where basically quality is hard to observe. So pro-social motivations means basically that workers care about helping people, not only about the paycheck. Uh, so Professor Francois separates motivation in two types. First is action oriented, which are the people who enjoy doing the helpful tasks. And the second is output oriented, who care about the beneficiary's result. Uh, so a core risk here is crowding out, where certain incentives or profit pressure reduce that intrinsic drive. Uh, Also, his work asks when public or non-profit provision protects the mission and raises the real effort, and also how to design contracts that keep motivation alive. I hope I also didn't miss any important points. If yes, please fix me.
No,
Um,
it's good.
but other than that, we could uh, go to the questions. Uh, so yeah, my first question would be, so in a real setting, well, like a school or hospital, how much does stronger pro-social motivation actually move results? For example, about how many percent fewer readmissions or how much higher test scores over 1 year or something like this.
Yeah, so it's hard to measure that. So I'm not sure. I don't know the empirical literature that well on that. There's probably been a lot of work on that recently. I haven't been, I haven't kept up with it. But let me just give you an example of a context where it really does matter. So, and the contractual solution that we come up with, right? So, every 5 years or so, most academic departments have to obtain a new leader, a new department head, or a director if it's a school, right? And that director comes from the the ranks of the professors. Right? So the professors, usually it's a meeting, and all the professors sit there and say they're thinking right in their head, this is the last thing I want to do because it's an awful job. Um, I'm an academic. I have this great job where I get to just explore the ideas and I do teaching and I like it. And then I have to move to being the boss of everyone. And being the boss of everyone means that I have to make sure that everyone's like happy, that I have to do the teaching loads. I have to, there's like a whole set of, you move from this position of being a colleague to, and a friend to a boss. And nobody wants to do it. So we could solve that problem easily, right? How would we solve that problem? We could just say, here's a lot of money. You do it for a few years, you get a lot of money. That would create incentives that would motivate people to take the job. Now, why don't we do that? I think a big part of the reason we don't do it is we'd be worried if we took somebody into that position who was motivated by money to do the job, because we need people who have an intrinsic motivation to do it. So if we did that, we'd now get a pool of applicants, some of whom are money motivated, some of whom are intrinsically motivated. And if we chose the wrong one, and it'd be hard to tell what's driving people, then we might end up with an organization that isn't really following the mission that we all signed up for, that most of us signed up for. So we explicitly don't use high-powered incentives in a situation like that. We explicitly try to make sure that the people who do it are driven by their intrinsic motivation. So that's one thing. Now, then there's another thing, which is, sometimes people really want to be department head. And usually that's a sign that they shouldn't be. Because if they really want to do it, it's often because they have their own interests at heart. So their motivation isn't then financial, but it's a mission that isn't consistent with the overall mission of the organization. And in that case, that's one of the few times where you see people who are really motivated to do it, to stop those other people doing it. So, then you actually are able to extract the mission motivation because of a fear that somebody who doesn't have the mission will do it. And that's another way that organizations utilize that. So I think every day we see this in the sorts of organizations that have very low-powered incentives for leadership positions, leadership roles. And it's because they're trying to induce the people with the right sorts of motivations to step into those roles. And this is very hard to do whilst simultaneously providing incentives, because, the job is awful in lots of ways. The job does require us to work a lot harder. So you want to provide financial incentives too. It's a very difficult problem. So I think that organizations grapple with that problem every day. I see it myself in our own academic organizations all the time.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Um, Regarding hiring, if we say like in hiring, what are some of the signals that would help a manager spot each type of workers? For example, money motivated and intrinsic motivated employee, and how would you adjust the job kind of for them?
I think humans are really good at reading other people's motivations. That's just so much of how we evolved. So you work with people and you can tell, how they're driven. And people are very bad. Well, some people are good at it, but over the longer term, you can tell what is the utility function of a person pretty accurately. Sometimes people surprise you, but it's very hard to do that. I mean, I know with my grad students, I can tell which ones want to really just study something because they're curious, and which ones just want to get a great job, and which ones will stop working once they get tenure. I think I have very good priors about that. Very accurate priors. My posteriors line up pretty well with the priors. And I think it's just part of being a member of our species. We are always trying to infer from actions the underlying motivations. Why? Because we're trying to make type inferences. And those type inferences are central to who become our friends and who we will share our lives with and who we will trust. So these things that's how we do it, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. So my last question, would be a more hypothetical one. So let's imagine if a city must choose between a non-profit and a for-profit organization to run a youth program where outcomes are hard to measure. And here, what are some of the numbers you would check first? And what simple thresholds would make you say, like, go non-profit for now?
Yeah, so the important thing is the outcomes are hard to measure. So, in general, I think when the outcomes are hard to measure, it's really difficult to write a contract that's going to align the incentives of a for-profit firm. So that's generally a big problem, right? So now, that just biases me towards thinking, well, nonprofits are probably a better way of delivering that. Now, I think that there's counters to that, and the counters are when there's real complementarities between the for-profit activities and the sort of socially beneficial activities. So, for instance, if you think of like sometimes these, let's take an example of the NBA basketball teams. A lot of them do community outreach stuff, and they do stuff which helps provide resources and opportunities to kids from underprivileged backgrounds. And how do they do that? Well, they have so much in the way of prestige and cachet and sort of social resources that come from being successful. Now that's something that they can really harness and utilize to a social good that a non-profit can't do. Like a sort of a generic non-profit that doesn't have any name isn't going to attract kids, isn't going to attract, it might provide some services, sure, but these organizations have a real complementarity between their main mission, which is winning basketball games, and these other missions, which are, extending opportunities to play this sport to kids who wouldn't have it otherwise. They're complementary. Why? Because they're more effective at doing that when famous people do it. And the famous people who are playing basketball, who are extremely wealthy people, are often from backgrounds like that and want to give back. So they're willing to work with their organization and sometimes for free to help kids, get into the sport. So, it seems to me that in principle that could work in multiple dimensions. That there's these complementarities between a for-profit motivation and a mission motivation. They can work together. That's a good example of it. But I think there are cases too where these are substitutes. So that if you are getting highly rewarded for a profitable activity, then you would have incentive to take some of the resources that could go to the one that's not rewarded and minimize them. So that's the problem with a profit-motivated firm providing these things in general, which is why there's a need for non-profits, but it can work. So it's the big question when you mentioned what the metrics were is like how complementary or how substitutable those sets of activities are. If they're extremely substitutable, then what it means is, I think, that the for-profit motivated firm is always going to substitute out of the thing that is not rewarded into the thing that's rewarded, and the market competition will drive that, and you're going to get too little mission motivated stuff. But when they're complementary, then for-profit firms can do a good job of that, and they might actually do a better job in many cases than non-profits. So that would be the key thing I'd look at.
Yes, thank you so much. That was a really clear example. Um, so yeah, I would say I have no questions left. Thank you so much.
Yep. So Professor Francois, I actually had a couple. So about the podcast, the structure, agenda, how it went, what did you like, what did you dislike? A little feedback session would really help us grow. We're completely open to criticism.
Oh, okay. So I think it's good. You guys are very well prepared. And there's two different styles of podcasts, I think. So one style is you ask questions and you give the person room to answer based on which is this one. This is the style that you have, and I think that's a good style. A different style is that you converse more. So it's more like a conversation, a back and forth, and you push the speaker and maybe out of their comfort zone and stuff. And that's a different style. And I don't know, I like those podcasts too. So if you do more of that, but then you kind of, sometimes you get real arguments, right? Antagonism. But sometimes the arguments are really fruitful. So I listen to a lot of podcasts that have more of a argumentative tone. And that's fine too, but not so much for academics. Academics generally want to just say what they know. And the reason is that we are generally reluctant to talk about things that we don't know much about. So when we get pushed into areas that we don't understand, we're likely to just say, I don't know. So it doesn't make such a good, but so yeah, that would be, I don't mind the style that you have. I think it's a good style and it's probably the right one for academics, but I also like that other style too.
Got it. Thanks a lot, Professor Francois. We do appreciate your time, your contribution. Thanks a lot, really. Hope we'll keep in touch. Thank you one more time.
Yeah,
It was
welcome.
really great meeting you.
Thank you. Likewise. See you.
Sure.